This is the CBS Evening News with Scott Pelley.
Good evening. Fast-moving developments tonight in a war backed by American firepower. Libyan rebels are pressing their attack after surging into the capital city, Tripoli. Forces loyal to the dictator Muammar Gaddafi have been cornered in small pockets of the city. One of those pockets is Gaddafi's presidential compound, which has not yet fallen. Gaddafi, who ruled Libya for 42 years, has not been found yet, but at least 2 of his sons reportedly have been arrested. Correspondent Barry Peterson is with the rebel forces.
The question tonight, where is Gaddafi? His country has gladly abandoned him, and most of his capital city is now in the hands of rebels.
You can sum up the mood in rebel-held areas in one word: joyful. Families brought their small children to be a part of it, and destroyed tanks were photo ops of change.
It's a new day. It's a feeling of a new day.
And what does it mean?
It's unbelievable. It's so happy. I cannot explain this to you in words.
It's hard to believe that a mere 24 hours ago, people might have been prosecuted for gathering like this and supporting the rebel cause. Now they're out celebrating. But there are still some no-go zones. This street is blocked down there, an indication that the fighting is still not over.
There's many snipers from Gaddafi military, and cannot go there because there's that side it's not safe.
Even the rebels were surprised at how little resistance they faced in their initial advance. But there were a few true believers left, like this pistol-packing anchorwoman for state TV trying to rally Gaddafi's forces. But in truth, it's clear there is not much fight left.
The rebels are now guarding the base for the notorious Khamis Brigade, a group of elite soldiers run by one of Gaddafi's sons, basically family enforcers. And when the rebels showed up to confront them, these brave soldiers just melted away.
The spoils of war for the rebels included anti-tank weapons, Gaddafi's ammo to be used against him. And rebels claim to have captured the airport and several of his sons, including Saif, who spent the last few months defending his father. Now in custody, he may face trial by the International Criminal Court at The Hague. But the big prize remains Gaddafi himself, who may be holed up in his Tripoli compound, which has come under continuous rebel attack. Even if he runs to Australia, says this man, one way or another, we will get him.
The rebels say taking Tripoli was a major accomplishment, but they will not declare victory until Gaddafi is either captured or killed. Scott?
Barry, of course, Gaddafi's been indicted by the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity. I wonder, are you hearing whether any country is willing to take him, to give him refuge?
So far, no. He's a pretty toxic guy, and some of the other Arab countries have their own troubles. And a friend who defected said this about Gaddafi: he's not like Hitler. He doesn't have the courage to kill himself, so he'll likely be taken alive.
Barry Peterson with the rebels in Libya. Thank you, Barry. What we're seeing tonight was largely made possible by U.S. air power. Since March, the U.S. has flown more than 5,000 missions, and American taxpayers have spent more than $896 million on this effort. After months of bombardment, the beginning of the end came quickly. On Saturday, Alex Crawford of Sky News joined the rebels in Zawiya and followed them on their lightning dash into Tripoli.
Street by street, inch by inch, they pushed forward and forced Gaddafi's men into retreat. The Gaddafi men were outnumbered and outmaneuvered, and their wounded were abandoned as they fled. They will be on their guard for any Gaddafi retaliation now, but the aim is to push on to Tripoli. The rebels had moved through town after town between Zawiya and Tripoli, meeting little resistance along the way. And as they pushed forward into the capital, in just one day, the roads were choked with vehicles packed full of people who wanted to overthrow the regime. As they edged closer to the centre, the residents came out of their homes in their hundreds. greeting the rebels like heroes. But there's an underlying fear of the regime and confusion over exactly where his troops have gone. This was a sight they thought they would never see. Green Square in the centre of Tripoli in the hands of the rebels.
We're joined now by Alex Crawford of Sky TV, who just filed that report. And Alex, I understand you're at a hospital in Tripoli. I wonder what the conditions are there now.
The conditions are absolutely shocking, not least because there have been firefights in and around the region of the hospital. This has prevented a number of the medical staff, including the cleaners, from getting to the hospital. They are running out of drugs, medicines, and now they're coming seriously close to running out of oxygen. And amongst all the casualties, there are children, at least 2 of them. One, a 3-year-old toddler who had a bullet wound to her stomach, and an 11-year-old girl who had been shot in the head by a sniper.
Give me a sense of Tripoli tonight. Is it simply chaos there, or do you have a sense that there is organization and restraint on the part of the rebels?
The rebels have managed to set up checkpoints on most of the roads. They're trying to control most of it. There clearly are some renegade groups of Gaddafi soldiers still out there, because there continues to be the sound of gunfire and firefights, particularly around the hospital in the area where we are at the moment.
Alex Crawford of Sky News, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
The rebels began as an ill-equipped, poorly trained amateur force, but they got a huge boost from those NATO airstrikes and surveillance. Mark Phillips has that part of the story.
The big question after the rebels' shockingly quick advance of the past days is, how did something that started so badly end up going so well? In the war's early stages, the rebel rabble earned their nickname by charging forward to take ground they would quickly lose through bad organization and bad weapons. NATO's entry into the conflict may have taken out Muammar Gaddafi's armored units and control centers, but in close fighting, the rebels still couldn't call in the airstrikes they needed.
What's lacking?
Lacking is precision NATO strikes.
Just last month, Ahmed Shabani complained he'd have to email someone in Benghazi to call in NATO planes, which then arrived too late.
And it gets difficult to seek and destroy when they're just moving in twos, hiding under trees, camouflaged.
In the advance on Tripoli, the problem seems to have been solved by removing the middleman, using U.S. drones to provide real-time intelligence, and even using covert NATO special forces to call in airstrikes. And there were 68 NATO attacks on targets in Tripoli alone over the weekend. The UN mandate was to protect civilians, but NATO's mission creep in Libya became obvious even in the early stages of the conflict, when some of Britain's special forces were captured near Benghazi. And the longer the conflict dragged on, the greater the involvement of the Western powers became. NATO says its commitment to protect civilians will continue through the war's end and possibly into the uncertainty of whatever follows. Mark Phillips, CBS News, London.
What follows is at the top of the president's agenda. Wyatt Andrews is with the vacationing president on Martha's Vineyard.
The president wasn't ready to declare victory in Libya, but he was sending messages to the victors, telling the rebel alliance that will soon govern Libya what kind of country the U.S. hopes will emerge from the chaos.
The opposition should continue to take important steps to bring about a transition that is peaceful, inclusive, and just.
In Benghazi, the political leader of the rebels was promising just that. Mustafa Abdul Jalil, head of the Transitional National Council, urged his fighters, many of whom are loyal to tribal leaders, not to engage in street justice and to lay down their weapons when the fighting ends. To prove to the world, Jalil said, that we are a modern Islamic nation that respects human rights and humanity. Mr. Obama also sought to remind Americans why Gaddafi was worth the use of U.S. air power. He recalled Gaddafi's links to several terror attacks, including the death of 189 Americans in the 1988 mid-air bombing of Pan Am Flight 103.
Gaddafi's regime has murdered scores of American citizens in acts of terror in the past. Today we remember the lives of those who were taken in those acts of terror and stand in solidarity with their families.
The defeat of Gaddafi took longer than the administration predicted, but for a president who was first criticized for being too aggressive in Libya and later criticized for relying too much on NATO, in the end, Scott, the approach seems to have worked.
Thanks, Wyatt. When Gaddafi goes, he will be the third dictator to fall in what's been called the Arab Spring. It all started last December with street protests in Tunisia. Within a month, the Tunisian president was gone. Days later, protests erupted in Egypt, and in a month, President Hosni Mubarak was gone. And that same week, the Libyan protests began.